A shrill alarm split the cabin air, the kind that froze every muscle before the mind could catch up. Passengers jerked upright in their seats as a red warning light pulsed above row 9. And at the center of the chaos, Evelyn Carter stood perfectly still, one hand braced on the seat back. Her breath held her eyes locked on the trembling flight attendant, who had just pressed the emergency call button by accident, or so it seemed. For a beat, the plane was nothing but the hum of engines and stunned silence. Then voices rose sharp, uncertain, layered with fear. Evelyn didn't move. Not yet. She studied the young attendant, a woman no older than 27, whose face had gone pale as paper. Her fingers twitched, her jaw clenched, and Evelyn saw something the others didn't panic, mixed with guilt. Not fear of the alarm itself, fear of what might come next. The captain's voice crackled over the speaker low and steady, asking for clarification from the cabin. The attendant, Rachel, opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her throat locked tight. Evelyn watched her chest rise and fall too fast, hyperventilating, hiding something. Evelyn recognized the signs. Years of teaching teenagers had trained her to see through masks people didn't know they were wearing. Passengers were turning now, murmuring. Someone called out, demanding answers. Someone else reached for their phone. Row by row, worry grew into accusation. Evelyn felt the shift in the air, the judgment forming before the facts. The same pattern she'd seen 100 times in life, a room full of people deciding who was safe, who was dangerous, who deserved patience, who didn't. She exhaled slowly, steadying her own pulse. Rachel finally spoke, but her voice cracked. I didn't mean to. Someone bumped into me. Her eyes flicked to a man seated at the aisle behind her. He looked up confused. I didn't touch her, he whispered, as if afraid to speak too loudly. A lie or the truth, it didn't matter yet. Not to Evelyn. She focused on Rachel, the trembling hands, the darting eyes, the way she kept glancing toward the front galley as if expecting someone to appear. Evelyn stepped forward, her voice low even. You need to breathe. Simple words, but they carried weight. Rachel blinked, startled. No one had spoken to her like that. Not with calm, not with clarity. Evelyn angled her body slightly, shielding her from the cameras that were beginning to rise around the cabin. She could feel the judgment from the older passengers, wondering why she, a stranger, thought she had any right to step in. But Evelyn didn't back down. Her presence was quiet, controlled, but commanding, in a way that unsettled people who underestimated her. She saw the distrust in their faces, the quick assumptions of who she was and what she must be. She let it wash over her unbothered. She had weathered far worse. Rachel swallowed hard, her voice barely a whisper. I didn't mean to call a code, I can't let him see I messed up again. Her eyes flicked toward the curtain, leading to first class. A shadow moved behind it. Tall, still, watching. The hum of tension deepened like the pressure drop before a storm. Evelyn's breath slowed. Something was wrong. Not with the alarm. Not with Rachel's fear of embarrassment. This was bigger. The kind of fear that lived in the bones. She leaned closer. Who are you afraid of? She asked, her tone firm, coaxing the truth. Rachel's lips opened, but before she could speak, the curtain snapped aside. A man stepped out, Leonard Brooks, the senior purser, his uniform pristine, his smile too polished to be sincere. His eyes swept the cabin, landing on Rachel with an almost imperceptible warning. Then on Evelyn, and there was something else there. Recognition and annoyance. Everything under control, Leonard asked, voice smooth as glass. It wasn't a question. It was a signal, a command for silence wrapped in courtesy. Evelyn didn't look away. She held his gaze steady as stone. She saw the arrogance there, the certainty of authority unchecked. She also saw that he knew exactly who she was, and he didn't like it. Rachel shrank back. Passengers leaned in. The engines roared beneath them climbing, and Evelyn realized what Rachel had been trying to hide wasn't a mistake. It was a secret. One powerful enough that Leonard Brooks was willing to bury it at 30,000 feet, even if he had to bury her too. Leonard's smile never reached his eyes, but it stretched wider as he stepped closer, his polished shoes whispering against the carpet. The cabin lights caught the edge of his jaw sharp as a blade. "Let's not alarm our passengers further," he said softly, his tone coated with civility, but hollow underneath. "Rachel, return to your station." Rachel froze. Her fingers dug into the fabric of her uniform knuckles, whitening. "I, sir, the alarm was an error." Leonard cut in his voice, tightening. "And we will not escalate a situation that does not exist." Evelyn felt the weight of the moment shift. A lie had been placed neatly on the table, wrapped with authority and expectation. A lie the crew was meant to nod along with. A lie the passengers were meant to swallow without question. Her jaw clenched. Leonard's eyes flicked toward her again, waiting for her compliance, as if she, too, were part of the system he commanded. Evelyn did not move. He stepped closer. "Ma'am," he said, lowering his voice, "please return to your seat. We appreciate your concern, but this is an internal matter." Internal matter. The phrase hit her like a cold draft. She'd heard it too many times in too many places, whenever institutions wanted the truth to stay behind closed doors. She studied him carefully now. The barely hidden impatience. The broad shoulders squared a little too rigidly. The faint sheen of sweat along his temple that didn't match his calm tone. A man who feared exposure more than inconvenience. Evelyn inhaled slowly. "Someone pressed a code," she said, her voice clear, but measured, projecting calm authority. "Passengers deserve to know they're safe." Leonard's jaw tensed. "They are. And your involvement is no longer required." Rachel took a tiny step back, as if preparing for impact. Leonard's hand twitched in her direction, a warning, invisible to most, unmistakable to Evelyn. Something inside Evelyn shifted. A memory. A courtroom hallway. A closed-door meeting. A stack of documents she wasn't supposed to see but did. And a promise she'd made to herself, long before she stepped onto this plane, never again stay silent when someone was being cornered. She took a half step forward, placing herself just slightly between Leonard and Rachel. "She looks shaken," Evelyn said. "Maybe someone should check on her before you are overstepping." Leonard snapped the veneer, cracking for a split second. The nearby passengers stiffened. A man in a denim jacket lowered his phone, slowly sensing the tension. A woman in row 8 drew her purse closer. No one spoke, but eyes flickered with the instinctive caution, born from witnessing something that might turn dangerous. Leonard noticed their stares. He straightened, smoothing his uniform as if wiping away his outburst. When he spoke again, his voice slid back into manufactured composure. "Let's keep order, please. We have procedures for these situations." Evelyn's breath tightened. The word procedures hung like smoke. She lifted her chin. "Then follow them." A ripple moved through the cabin. Leonard's smile thinned until it was a razor. He didn't answer her. Instead, he turned sharply to Rachel. "Report to the galley. Now." Rachel hesitated, her breath catching. Her eyes darted to Evelyn, a silent plea flickering beneath the fear. It lasted only a moment before she lowered her gaze and hurried toward the front, disappearing behind the curtain. Leonard watched her go, then pivoted back to Evelyn. "You're interfering with crew operations. If it continues, I will have to note your behavior as disruptive." The threat was quiet, measured, intentional. Evelyn felt the old heat rise in her chest, not anger, but certainty. Certainty that this man, this moment, this pressure all pointed toward something deeper. Something hidden? Something Rachel knew but could not say. The plane shuddered lightly as they hit a patch of turbulence. Wine glasses in first class clinked. Someone gasped. The engines hummed steadily beneath it all, as if reminding every soul on board how high above the earth they were, and how small their choices could seem in the wrong hands. The curtain rustled again. Rachel peeked out her face, paler than before, her eyes locked on Evelyn's, wide and urgent. And then she mouthed one word. "Help!" Evelyn's pulse kicked hard. Leonard turned, too slow to catch it. But Evelyn caught all of it. The fear, the desperation, the truth trembling at the edges, a secret that wouldn't stay buried much longer. Leonard stepped forward, blocking Rachel from view, his posture stiffening as he noticed Evelyn watching. "Please return to your seat," he said. But this time, it wasn't a request. It was a barricade, a warning, an admission. Evelyn didn't move, because now she knew one thing with absolute clarity. The real emergency on this plane had nothing to do with the alarm, and everything to do with the man trying so hard to silence it. The curtain quivered behind Leonard's shoulder, a faint tremor that didn't match the steady hum of the engines. Evelyn didn't take her eyes off it. Not even when Leonard leaned closer, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Sit down," he said, each syllable clipped and controlled. "You're creating tension, and tension at altitude is dangerous." Evelyn held her ground. His breath smelled faintly of stale coffee. His posture radiated the confidence of a man who believed he owned authority simply by wearing it. But behind him, the curtain shifted again, this time enough for Evelyn to glimpse movement, too quick, too furtive to be routine. A shadow, a whisper. Someone else in the galley. Someone Rachel didn't want Leonard to see. Evelyn's heartbeat slowed into something cold, steady, instinctual. Years of navigating broken systems, failed administrations, and quiet injustices had honed her senses sharper than any threat could dull. "I asked you a question," Leonard said. Evelyn met his gaze. "And I heard you." Passengers turned in their seats, pretending not to stare. A man with silver hair adjusted his glasses, watching from row 7. A middle-aged woman clutched her armrest, sensing danger without understanding its shape. Tension spread through the cabin in slow, silent waves. Leonard exhaled sharply, the veneer of politeness thinning again. "For everyone's safety, please cooperate. We need this cabin calm." Calm. The word rang hollow, because as he spoke, a metallic clatter sounded behind the curtain, soft but distinct. A tray, a latch, a struggle. Evelyn's attention snapped toward the noise. If Leonard heard it, he ignored it deliberately. She tilted her head just enough for her voice to travel past him. "Rachel, are you all right?" No response. The cabin held its breath. Leonard stepped into her line of sight, blocking the galley entirely. His shoulders squared, his voice cooling into something closer to a threat wrapped in professionalism. "You do not address my crew without my permission." Evelyn let out a slow breath. "I'm checking on a person who asked for help. That's not disruptive. That's human." A soft murmur rippled through the nearest passenger's agreement. Doubt, fear. They weren't sure yet whom to trust, but they were watching. Leonard noticed. His smile tightened just enough to crack. He turned toward the flight phone on the bulkhead, reaching for it. Not an emergency call. Not the captain. No, the crew hotline used to log passenger issues. The kind of call that could escalate into documentation penalties, possible removal after landing. He intended to mark Evelyn as a problem. Evelyn stepped forward, her voice cool but firm. Before you make that call, you should think carefully about what's actually happening here. Leonard paused. Only a fraction, but it was enough. Footsteps approached from the back of the plane, heavy, deliberate. Another flight attendant emerged, Mark Jennings, mid-30s, calm demeanor, eyes sharp. He wasn't part of the earlier conflict, and his presence shifted the energy instantly. "Everything okay up here?" Mark asked, scanning the row, the faces, the tension. Leonard didn't turn around. Handled. Mark's gaze settled briefly on Evelyn, then flicked to the curtain. He listened. Really listened. His brow tightened subtle, but Evelyn caught it. "There's a passenger in the galley," he said slowly. "Someone who shouldn't be." Leonard stiffened. "That area is secured." Mark didn't blink. Not right now. The whisper of a gasp echoed through the cabin. Then Rachel's voice, fragile, trembling, slipped through the curtain. "Mark, don't let him in here." Leonard spun toward the galley, but Mark moved first, planting himself between them, with a precision that revealed training far beyond customer service. His voice dropped to a low register meant only for Leonard. "You told me the galley was clear." Leonard's jaw flexed. "Step aside." "No," Mark said, and the word landed with quiet, unmistakable weight. For the first time, Leonard's confidence faltered. Evelyn saw it flickering across his face, like a crack in old paint. A man accustomed to control, feeling it slip grain by grain through his hands. Evelyn spoke softly, clearly. Rachel asked for help. Let her speak. Leonard opened his mouth, but before he could force the narrative back under his control, the curtain was yanked aside. Rachel stumbled out, her face blotched red, her breath ragged, and behind her, only for a second, Evelyn glimpsed a figure inside the galley. A man in civilian clothes, clutching a messenger bag to his chest as if it were a lifeline, eyes wild with fear. He was not a passenger Evelyn had seen board, and he was not supposed to be there. Rachel grabbed Mark's sleeve, her voice barely holding together. "He needs help. He shouldn't be on this plane." Leonard told me to keep quiet. The entire cabin froze. Leonard's face drained of color, and Evelyn knew without hesitation that whatever secret lived in that galley went far deeper than a frightened attendant or a silenced mistake. It was something dangerous, and Leonard Brooks was willing to risk every soul on that plane to keep it hidden. The man in the galley didn't move. He stood half-shadowed by the narrow strip of light, clutching the messenger bag so tightly the leather groaned beneath his fingers. His chest rose in sharp, uneven bursts, as if each breath had to fight its way through panic. The cabin's murmurs fell into a stunned hush, every sound swallowed by the pressure of 20,000 feet and the unmistakable presence of danger. Leonard stepped forward, his voice commanded into steadiness, but the strain showed in the edges. "Sir, you need to remain where you are. Do not leave the galley." The man didn't answer. He jerked back instinctively, bumping into the metal counter, the clang echoing down the aisle like a warning bell. His eyes darted wildly toward the curtain, toward the passengers, toward the floor, as if he were calculating escape routes where none existed. Mark held up a calming hand, his tone softer, purposeful. "Hey, you're all right. We're just trying to understand what's going on." "No," the man whispered, shaking his head so fast the motion blurred. "No one can know. No one can—" His breath fractured again. He reeled, gripping a drawer handle to stay upright. Rachel stepped forward, voice trembling but determined. "He isn't dangerous. He's scared. Leonard told me to ignore him, and Leonard snapped Rachel. His tone cut like a blade, authority sharpened into threat." Evelyn saw her flinch, and she saw something else. Shame, regret, a truth heavy enough to bend her posture. The passengers were stirring now, heads turning, bodies shifting uncomfortably. The man in denim sat straighter alert. The woman, clutching her purse, whispered a quiet prayer. The air had thickened into a single collective breath no one could seem to release. Evelyn felt her pulse quicken, but her voice remained steady. "Sir," she said to the unknown man, "you don't have to hide. Tell us what's happening." His gaze snapped toward her. Not angry, not hostile, but startled, like someone recognizing safety for the first time in hours. Leonard stepped between them. "Ma'am, sit down, stop," Evelyn said quietly. The softness of the word hit harder than a shout. Leonard stared at her, thrown off balance. It was the first time anyone had spoken to him like his authority was optional. The power shifted almost imperceptibly, like the tilt of a scale, weighted by truth instead of titles. Mark watched them both, reading the room, reading the man, reading the danger coiled beneath the silence. The plane vibrated lightly as they passed through a patch of rough air. Overhead, bins rattled. A coffee cup rolled across a tray table. Someone gasped. Someone muttered to turn back to land to call the captain. Evelyn remained still. Then, with a trembling breath, the man in the galley finally spoke. "I didn't board this flight." Rachel closed her eyes, the admission hitting her like a physical blow. Leonard's face drained, fear flickering through the facade before he forced it away. Mark's brows drew together. "What do you mean you didn't board, sir? It's impossible to be on this plane without I was already on it," the man whispered, gripping the bag like it was the only solid thing in the world. "Before you boarded the passengers, before the catering truck left, before the doors closed." Evelyn felt the chill crawl across her spine. Mark inhaled sharply, realization crashing in. "You were in the service compartment." The man nodded, one slow defeated. The cabin collectively recoiled, the implications unfolding in a cold, jagged line. Stowaway, an unvetted, unknown individual, trapped in the narrow metal body of a moving aircraft. Hidden, silent, terrified. It was the kind of scenario airline manuals discussed only in hypotheticals. Leonard's voice sliced through the panic. "This is exactly why we needed to keep this contained. A stowaway is a federal offense. The captain must not be distracted mid-flight." "That's not your call." Mark shot back, shock hardening into resolve. Leonard stiffened as though struck. Rachel's voice broke softly. "He told me if I said anything I'd lose my job. He said corporate would blame me. He said," she swallowed. "He said no one would believe me." The stowaway shook his head violently. "I'm not here to hurt anyone. I was hiding from someone on the ground. Someone who followed me. Someone who—" His voice cracked. He pressed a shaking hand against the messenger bag. This is evidence. I can't let the wrong person get to it." The plane jolted again, harder this time. A baby cried. Someone cursed under their breath. A voice from row 8 said what everyone feared. If he isn't supposed to be here, who's he running from? Leonard opened his mouth, but Evelyn saw the answer in his eyes before he could form a single word. The danger wasn't outside the plane. It had boarded with them. And the only person who wasn't afraid of the truth was the one everyone had underestimated. The engines deepened into a steady rumble as the aircraft pushed through another band of turbulent air. But the real turbulence now lived inside the narrow space between the galley and row 9. The stowaway clutched his messenger bag closer, knuckles bleaching as though the bag itself were the last anchor keeping him from falling apart. His eyes darted to the aisle, then to the ceiling, then to Leonard, the one person he never allowed his gaze to rest on for more than a second. Mark exhaled slowly, grounding himself before speaking. "Sir," he said, voice low and steady, "you need to tell us what's in that bag." "No," the man whispered, shaking his head. "Not until the plane lands." Evelyn stepped forward, her presence quiet but deliberate, her eyes measuring his fear without judgment. "You said someone on the ground was after you. Someone dangerous. If we're going to protect the people on this plane, we need to understand what you're carrying." He didn't respond, his breath hitched shallow and panicked. Then he squeezed his eyes shut, as if battling a memory too heavy to voice. Leonard saw the opening and lunged at it. "He's lying. He's manipulating you. He's probably unstable enough," Mark said sharply. The word cracked through the cabin like a snapped wire. Leonard froze, caught off guard by the authority in Mark's tone. The passengers felt it too. Some straightened, some leaned forward, the atmosphere shifting subtly around the man who had remained quiet until now. Quiet, but watching everything. Evelyn noticed the same thing Leonard did. Mark wasn't just another attendant with a calm face. There was something in his posture, the firmness of his movements, the way he placed himself between danger and the defenseless. Military law enforcement. His composure under pressure wasn't learned in customer service training, but Leonard saw something else: threat, a challenge to his control. He pivoted, voice tightening. "I'm calling the captain. This is no longer optional. We're dealing with a security breach, and protocol dictates you will not make that call." Mark said, his voice low, unblinking. Passengers gasped. A ripple of fear passed through the cabin. No one had ever heard crew contradict one another like this, not at 30,000 feet. Leonard stepped closer, chest lifting with indignation. "You're obstructing a senior crew member. Protocol says the cabin must first be assessed," Mark cut in, "by the person closest to the threat. That's me, and disclosing unverified information to the cockpit mid-flight only risks alarming the captain before we know the full picture." Leonard's face twisted. "You think you know better?" Mark didn't answer. Instead, he turned to the stowaway. "What's your name?" The man swallowed hard. "David," he whispered. "David Sloane." Evelyn studied his trembling hands. "David, who are you running from?" His eyes flickered to Leonard again, quick, involuntary, filled with a fear Evelyn recognized instantly. Leonard stiffened, and that involuntary tick answered the question better than any confession could. Evelyn's breath tightened. "David," she said softly, "has Leonard threatened you?" David flinched, not from her voice but from the name. The hush that fell over the cabin was cold and absolute. Rachel's hand flew to her mouth. A passenger in row 10 whispered, "Oh Lord." Someone else murmured that they should turn the plane around. Leonard stepped forward, voice rising. "This is absurd. He is a criminal, a trespasser. He has compromised this aircraft, no. David said suddenly, voice raw, shaking. I didn't sneak on to hurt anyone. I came on because I had to disappear before he found me. He was already calling security to search the airport. I had evidence he didn't want leaving the ground. What evidence, Evelyn asked. David hugged the bag tighter. Financial documents, internal memos, projections, fraud. Millions stolen over the years, buried through shell accounts under employees' names. Passengers turned to Leonard like a single organism. Leonard laughed, but it was the wrong kind of laugh, thin, brittle cracking under its own tension. You believe him? He's delirious. He has no proof. Mark looked at the bag. Then let's see it. Leonard snapped. Absolutely not. The outburst was too loud, too sharp, too defensive. Rachel backed away from him. The passengers murmured louder now, anger, suspicion, betrayal weaving into the air like static. Evelyn felt something cold settle into place, a piece of truth snapping cleanly into alignment. She turned her gaze slowly, steadily toward Leonard. Tell me, she said, voice soft but edged with steel. Why would a man hiding from the world be more afraid of you than anyone else? Leonard opened his mouth, but this time no sound came out. The engines hummed beneath them. The plane vibrated lightly, and Evelyn Carter, the woman everyone had underestimated, saw the full shape of the truth reflected in Leonard's silence. David wasn't the danger. Leonard was. A low groan rolled through the aircraft as it sliced into a heavier band of turbulence, the kind that rattled cups and tightened every spine. The overhead lights flickered once, dimming just enough to draw a gasp from someone in row 8. But the real tremor, the one that stole the air from the cabin, came from Leonard Brooks. He stepped backward almost imperceptibly, as though Evelyn's words had struck a nerve he'd spent years burying. His jaw worked. His fingers twitched at his sides. His breath sharpened through his nose in a single controlled inhale. It was the inhale of a man cornered. Evelyn didn't move. Her voice, low and measured, hung like a verdict in the air. You want to explain why he's afraid of you? For the first time since the confrontation began, Leonard didn't have a prepared response. He stared at her. Really stared like he was searching for the place she'd learned to speak with such authority. She wasn't loud, she wasn't aggressive, but there was something in her eyes he couldn't reconcile. Something that made him hesitate. Mark noticed it too. His gaze flicked between them, studying Leonard's unraveling composure and Evelyn's steady silence. Rachel stood behind Mark, tears still clinging to her lashes. He told me, she whispered, voice fragile, that if anyone found out David was in the galley, it would cost all of us our jobs. He said corporate would believe him over any of us. Leonard swung toward her. Rachel stopped talking. The command cracked like a whip. Passengers jolted, but Rachel didn't step back this time. She hugged her arms around herself, shaking, and spoke louder. He told me to lock the galley, she said. Told me to ignore him. Told me to say nothing if anyone heard noise. But he was terrified, and I didn't know what to do. You were supposed to follow orders, Leonard hissed. No, Mark snapped. She was supposed to protect passengers and uphold safety. That includes reporting unknown individuals on board. Leonard's mouth curled, but before he could speak, David's voice rose from behind them, thin, desperate, carrying the weight of too many sleepless nights. He threatened me, too. The words hit harder than the turbulence. Leonard's body went rigid. David stepped forward, gripping the curtain for balance, the messenger bag still pressed tight to his chest. His voice cracked under the strain. I worked for him. I processed financial audits. I saw numbers that didn't add up. Millions shifted year after year through accounts under flight attendants' names, some under dead employees' names. His throat bobbed. And then one under mine. The passengers murmured, quiet shock rippling through the cabin. Evelyn watched Leonard carefully. He didn't deny it. He didn't even try. Instead, he straightened his uniform, smoothing his collar, pulling the fraying edges of control back around himself like armor. When he finally spoke, his voice was cool. Too cool. You have no proof. Whatever is in that bag could be fabricated. You think anyone will believe a man who hid in a service compartment to avoid security? His eyes slid across the cabin to the passengers, whose fear he counted on. He is unstable, and none of you know who this woman is either. She's just a passenger inserting herself where she doesn't belong. The woman clutching her purse gasped softly. A man in row 7 shook his head uneasy. Evelyn didn't flinch. You're deflecting. I'm maintaining order, Leonard said. You're losing it, Mark replied. Leonard turned on him sharply. Watch your tone. But Mark didn't step back. Instead, he lifted his chin slightly. You knew he was on board before takeoff. Why didn't you alert the captain? Leonard's lips thinned. I told you I didn't know. David let out a trembling, bitter laugh. You shoved me into the galley when ground security passed. You told me if I said one word, I would disappear, just like the numbers I found. Gasps rippled through the cabin. Leonard took one step forward, finger raised, voice cracking with the first true fissure of panic. You're lying. But behind him, behind the mask of authority, behind the barked orders, behind the tightening fists, his eyes betrayed him. Fear. Not of David, not of Evelyn, but of the truth breaking loose in a sealed metal tube 30,000 feet above the ground. Then Evelyn spoke again, quiet, unwavering, with a calm that cut deeper than anger ever could. Leonard, she said, you keep talking about who people will believe. Her gaze didn't waver. Neither did her voice. But you haven't asked the real question. The passengers leaned in. Even the engines seemed to dim beneath her words. Leonard swallowed hard. What question? Evelyn stepped closer. Not confrontational, simply certain her presence, steady as bedrock. Why, she asked softly, are you so afraid of being believed? The cabin fell into absolute silence. In that single, suspended breath, Leonard Brooks realized the truth Evelyn had known long before he did. He wasn't losing control. He had already lost it. The silence after Evelyn's question lasted only a heartbeat, but it felt like a pressure drop inside the fuselage, sharp, disorienting, heavy enough to bend the air. Leonard's lips parted, then closed again, his jaw tightening, as though he were trying to swallow something jagged. His eyes flickered, not with authority this time, but with calculation, the frantic kind of math a man does when he's running out of exits. A faint ding sounded overhead as the seatbelt sign blinked on once more. Mild turbulence rocked the cabin glasses, clinking lightly, passengers gripping armrests with a mix of fear and morbid fascination. No one looked away. They were watching the unraveling of a man who had built his entire world on being the one in control. Mark stepped slightly in front of Rachel, his stance protective, not threatening, but unmistakably resolute. The muscles in his jaw flexed. Every inch of him radiated the quiet discipline of someone who had been trained to keep chaos contained. Evelyn didn't know his background, But she understood one thing: he had recognized something in Leonard that went beyond misconduct. Something predatory. Something systemic. Leonard finally spoke, voice brittle. "You don't know what you're talking about." Evelyn didn't break eye contact. "Then help us understand." Her calmness unnerved him more than any accusation. David shifted in the galley doorway, rubbing a trembling hand down his face. "He's been pulling money for years," he said, voice raw. "I worked in regional finance. When I found discrepancies, I asked questions. He told me to correct the numbers and keep them corrected." David swallowed hard. "When I didn't, he found a way to make it look like I was the one who stole it." Leonard snapped. "That's a lie." But the outburst was too sharp, too desperate. Passengers recoiled. A man in a worn leather jacket muttered, "Someone innocent doesn't blow up like that." Mark shot Leonard a hard look. "Company protocols require reporting suspected crimes. Did you file a report?" Leonard bristled. "I don't answer to you." "You do now," Mark said quietly. The shift was seismic. A crew hierarchy had cracked, not because of rank, but because of moral authority. And Mark held it. Leonard turned to the passengers, as if searching for validation he no longer knew how to earn. "Folks, listen, this man is unstable. He hid on the plane. He fabricated documents. You fabricated the numbers." David burst out, stepping forward as though yanked by truth itself. "I only came on board because you called airport security and told them I was dangerous. You tried to trap me on the ground." Rachel gasped. "You told security he was violent." Leonard's eyes snapped toward her. "I never said you did," she whispered. "I remember. You told them to prepare for an aggressive subject." Her voice broke. "I didn't understand then. I do now." The passengers murmured in outrage. People who had kept silent all their lives, especially those old enough to know the weight of silence, found their voices rising together. That's misconduct. That's intimidation. That's criminal. Leonard's breathing sped up. His veneer cracked further, the polished professionalism slipping like wet paint. "You people don't understand the pressure I'm under, the decisions I have to make. The lies you have to maintain," Evelyn asked softly. His head snapped toward her. She took a step closer, not to intimidate, but to confront the fiction he had lived inside. Her voice was low, even grounded. "I've seen men like you," she said. "Men who think leadership is control, who think fear is loyalty, who think that if they talk first, talk loudest, talk with enough certainty, people will believe them, and not the truth standing right in front of them." Leonard swallowed hard, the tendons in his neck tightening. "You've spent years convincing everyone you were the authority," Evelyn continued. "But authority isn't power. Integrity is." A tremor ran through Leonard's stance. He opened his mouth, but no words came. Rachel whispered, barely audible, "Evelyn, how do you know all this?" Evelyn hesitated for the first time. A flicker of something resolve slid across her face. She drew a slow breath, her eyes lowering for a moment, before lifting again, steady and unflinching. "Because," she said quietly, "I wasn't always a teacher." A ripple passed through the cabin. Even Leonard stared. Evelyn's voice deepened, not louder but heavier. "I spent years investigating internal fraud for state agencies. I watched men just like him bury whistleblowers, intimidate witnesses, manipulate records. I learned to hear lies in the pauses between words." David stared at her stunned. Rachel covered her mouth. Mark's eyes widened as puzzle pieces snapped together. and Leonard staggered back half a step, as if the floor itself had tilted beneath him. "You," he whispered. "You're not supposed to be here." The engines hummed beneath them. Outside, endless sky. Inside, the truth, tightening its hold around the man who had run out of places to hide. And Evelyn Carter, quiet, underestimated, unshakable, had just revealed the part of herself Leonard feared most, the part that could see right through him. The plane lurched again, a deeper shudder this time, enough to rattle the overhead compartments and draw a chorus of startled breaths from the passengers. But the turbulence wasn't what made Leonard stumble. It was Evelyn's revelation, clean, sharp, inescapable, hitting him with the force of a confession he never intended to face. He stared at her as though she had shifted shape right in front of him, as though the woman he'd dismissed as a meddling schoolteacher had suddenly become a threat far more dangerous than the stowaway he'd tried to bury in the galley. "You investigated fraud," Leonard repeated, voice shrinking around the edges. For the state Evelyn didn't blink. For long enough to recognize a man running from the truth, her posture didn't shift, didn't waver. She stood as steady as the aisle rail, her presence a quiet indictment in a space he once controlled effortlessly. Mark exhaled slowly, finally understanding the weight behind her certainty. That explains a lot. A few passengers nodded openly now, recognition softening their fear into something like trust. An older woman pressed a hand over her heart, whispering to her husband. I knew she wasn't just guessing. The way she spoke, I knew it. Leonard's eyes darted to the passengers, calculating who still believed him, who he might sway back. But the tide had shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, but undeniably. And that was what frightened him most. Rachel stepped forward, her voice trembling but purposeful. "Leonard, what else did you lie about?" He shot her a glare sharp enough to wound. "Watch your tone. I trained you. I made sure you were promoted, and you used that to control me," Rachel said, the air leaving her lungs in a rush, as if freed from a weight she'd carried too long. "That's not leadership. That's manipulation," the man in the denim jacket muttered. "She's right." Evelyn watched Leonard's breathing tighten the rhythm, quickening like a drumbeat under strain. He turned away from Rachel, from Mark, from the passengers, and fixed his gaze on David instead. "This is your fault," Leonard hissed. "If you had stayed quiet, none of this would be happening. You don't understand the consequences of what you're doing." David's grip tightened on the messenger bag. "I understand perfectly. You're afraid." Leonard lunged forward a step, but Mark moved instantly, one arm out, blocking him with a motion so swift and practiced it startled even Evelyn. "You're not touching him," Mark said. His voice was soft, final. The cabin absorbed the authority in it, like dry earth taking rain. Leonard froze. Passengers held their breath. A metallic groan echoed from beneath the plane as the aircraft dipped through another air pocket. The pressure shifted. The air felt heavier, but Evelyn's voice cut cleanly through it. "Leonard, listen to me." He didn't turn, but his shoulders twitched just barely. "You've reached the point where you can't talk your way out anymore," she said. Not with excuses. Not with protocol. Not with threats. Everyone in this cabin has heard enough to know something is wrong. He swallowed hard. And we both know, she continued, that once the captain learns a stowaway is on board, and why the situation is out of your hands. For the first time, Leonard looked scared. Not furious, not cornered. Scared. Because Evelyn wasn't just exposing him. She was dismantling the last illusion he'd been clinging to. Control. The cabin lights flickered again, this time staying dim. The intercom crackled softly, with background static, small atmospheric noises that became thunderous when layered over tension, this thick. The older man in row 7 raised his hand slightly. "Mum, should we alert the captain ourselves? Someone needs to hear what's happening." Leonard spun on him. Voice, when it came, was too sharp, too loud, too frantic. "No one touches that call button. Do you understand? No one." The outburst pulled a gasp from nearly every passenger. Evelyn stepped forward, between Leonard and the rows, shielding the passengers not with force, but with presence. "You're proving our point," she said. Leonard's chest rose and fell in uneven bursts. "If the captain finds out now, he'll divert the flight. The investigation will start mid-air. Federal authorities will meet us on the runway. Everyone's job will be on the line. Every passenger will be interrogated. You'll all be stranded. Hours. Days." "Do you want that?" a woman in row 6 whispered. "He's trying to scare us." But Evelyn looked deeper, not at his words, but at the structure of his fear. She could see the pattern clearly now. "This isn't about protecting the passengers," she said. "This is about protecting yourself." Leonard didn't deny it. He couldn't. The stowaway's voice rose again, tired, broken. "Leonard, it's over." Leonard closed his eyes, as though the admission physically pained him. Around them, the cabin waited, suspended in a fragile, breathless stillness. Then Mark spoke calm and unwavering. "I'll call the captain." Leonard's eyes shot open. "Mark!" "Don't. You don't know what you're risking." Mark stepped toward the handset on the bulkhead. His voice dropped to a low, steady rumble. "I know exactly what I'm risking." He lifted the phone. Leonard whispered, defeated and furious all at once. "Don't do this." But Mark pressed the button anyway. And at 30,000 feet above a country that had no idea a battle for truth was unfolding in the narrow aisle of a commercial flight, the call connected. The line crackled as Mark spoke into the handset. His tone controlled, measured, betraying none of the tension knotting the cabin. "Captain, this is Mark in the main cabin. We have a situation that requires immediate attention. It involves a security concern and a compromised crew member. I need you up here." A beat of silence followed, thin, taut as wire, before the captain's calm voice replied. "Understood. Secure the area. I'm on my way." Mark hung up. The click of the receiver sounded like the snap of a trap shutting. Leonard staggered back a step, air, leaving his lungs in a ragged exhale. "You idiot," he whispered, voice trembling with fury he could no longer disguise. "You just destroyed everything." But his anger wasn't aimed at the cabin. It was aimed at the truth finally catching him. Mark squared his shoulders, the posture of a man bracing for fallout he'd already accepted. "I did my job," he said. "Something you forgot how to do." The passengers murmured, tension weaving through their whispers like electricity. A woman near the window crossed herself. A man in the aisle muttered that the captain needed to hurry. No one dared stand. No one dared blink too long. The air inside the fuselage felt denser now, as though the plane itself was holding its breath. Rachel wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, relief and dread tangling together. "When the captain sees, David sees what's happening. Leonard, what were you thinking?" Leonard glared at her, but his power had slipped like sand through an open palm. "You don't understand," he rasped. "None of you understand what you're stepping into." Evelyn watched him closely. "Then explain it." He laughed, a hollow, splintering sound. "Explain it. You think this started with one forged report, one stowaway. You have no idea how deep this goes." Rachel's breath hitched. How deep Leonard looked past her. Past. Evelyn passed all of them, as though searching for something outside the window. Something falling away beneath the altitude. When he finally spoke, his voice was thin, cracking under strain. It didn't start with me. David flinched as if struck. You used my name. My accounts. Leonard shook his head, defeated and furious all at once. Because mine was being watched. Because every penny I touched had to match another ledger. You think I wanted this? You think I chose to be the one balancing the rot I was following orders? Evelyn's stomach tightened. Whose orders? Leonard's eyes snapped toward her, dark, terrified. The same people who will come for him the moment this plane lands. He pointed at David with a shaking hand. You have no idea who you're protecting. The plane rattled again as they sank through another layer of rough air, but this tremor felt different. Not random. Not external. It felt like the cabin itself absorbed Leonard's confession and trembled under its weight. Evelyn stepped forward, voice steady, despite the chill crawling along her spine. Then enlighten us. Leonard opened his mouth, but a voice came from behind them, low, authoritative, steady. That won't be necessary. The curtain parted, and the captain stepped into the aisle. Captain Harris, a man in his late 50s with silver-streaked hair and a crease of calm measured across his features, surveyed the cabin with the eyes of someone who had seen storms far beyond weather. His presence filled the narrow space instantly, the way true authority does not through volume, but through gravity. What exactly is happening in my aircraft? He asked, scanning the faces. The tension, the stowaway clutching his bag, the crew locked in a standoff. Leonard rushed forward. Captain, I can explain, step aside, Captain Harris said, without raising his voice. Leonard froze. And for the first time, Evelyn saw him not as a predator or a mastermind, but as a man suddenly stripped of the only leverage he ever had. Mark spoke first. Captain, we have a stowaway in the forward galley, unknown to the crew except Leonard. Rachel was instructed not to report him. The stowaway claims to have evidence of financial crimes involving Leonard and others outside this aircraft. Captain Harris absorbed this without flinching. His eyes drifted briefly to the bag David held, then to Leonard, who avoided his gaze like a guilty child. Is that accurate? The captain asked Leonard. Leonard didn't answer. The silence was enough. The captain turned to David. Sir, is anyone on board in immediate danger? David shook his head quickly. No. I swear. I'm just trying to survive long enough to hand this over to federal authorities. Captain Harris nodded. Then everyone will remain calm, and we will proceed the right way. Evelyn watched the shift ripple through the passengers, the collective exhale of having someone competent, someone grounded, someone who wasn't afraid to face the truth at the helm. The captain lifted the handset beside him and pressed a button. Cockpit, he said, his voice steady. Initiate secure communication with ground control. We have a federal situation on board. Leonard's knees buckled. Mark caught Rachel's hand. David closed his eyes, relief trembling through him. And Evelyn felt something else. Something she hadn't felt since the moment she left her old job behind, the familiar weight of justice beginning to turn. The applause began slowly, a cautious ripple moving through the auditorium as Evelyn stepped back from the podium, her breath still trembling from the weight of everything she had poured into the room. Then the ripple deepened, rose into a wave that rolled across the rows of educators, advocates, community leaders and strangers who now looked at her with something far different from curiosity. They looked at her with recognition, respect, gratitude. Some stood, others wiped their eyes. The sound swelled until it filled the vast conference hall and pressed against the rafters like a living thing. Evelyn steadied herself with one hand on the edge of the podium, not because she was overwhelmed, but because she felt the shift in the room, the way a pilot feels the change in wind before the instruments are noticed. It wasn't applause for a speech. It was affirmation for a truth too long left unspoken. When the noise finally settled, when the crowd eased into their chairs again, Evelyn stepped aside to allow the next speaker to approach. But he didn't. He remained in the wings, gesturing gently for her to stay where she was. He understood what the room understood. This wasn't a moment that needed to be rushed. It needed to breathe. Behind the lights and the rows of faces, behind the hum of whispered conversations and the soft creak of chairs, Evelyn felt a strange, quiet form around her. A quiet made not of silence, but of clarity. For the first time since the day of the flight, she understood that the story she had lived through wasn't just one of fear or corruption or confrontation. It was one of emergence. She had been forced to step into a role she thought she abandoned years ago, a role she'd buried beneath textbooks and lesson plans, believing that a quieter life meant a simpler one. But truth has a way of finding the people strong enough to carry it even when they aren't looking for it. As she exited the stage, Mark was waiting for her leaning against the side wall, with the same steady presence he carried on the plane. He stood taller now, as if the truth he helped protect had straightened his spine. "You did well," he said softly, offering her a small nod that carried more meaning than any applause. Evelyn smiled, the muscles in her face loosening with gratitude. "Thank you," she said, "for everything that day, for everything and after." Mark shook his head. "You didn't need me. You never did. You saw the whole picture before any of us did. You knew what Leonard was capable of. You knew how to bring out the truth." She met his eyes. "I didn't know how it would end." He gave a faint smile. "You didn't need to. You just needed to start." Behind them, a sudden cluster of attendees moved toward Evelyn, eager to shake her hand, to thank her, to share their own stories. People were lining up, waiting patiently, each carrying something in their expressions, a memory, an injustice, a question, or simply admiration. Evelyn glanced at Mark, who stepped aside to give her space. Rachel approached next, quieter, more tentative, her nervous smile still shadowed by what she had endured under Leonard's control. But there was strength there, too. Strength forged in honesty and consequence. "I've been thinking about taking a break from flying," Rachel admitted, wringing her hands before forcing them still. "But hearing you today, it made me think maybe I shouldn't run. Maybe I should help fix what's broken." Evelyn reached out, offering her hand. "You already started," she said gently. "The day you told the truth, you did something most people never find the courage to do." Rachel nodded, tears threatening but held back by resolve. "I just didn't want to be afraid anymore." Evelyn's voice softened. "Then don't be. You're not the same woman who walked onto that plane." As Rachel walked away, David approached with a slow, steady gait. He looked healthier now, less haunted, though the shadows of what he had lived through still clung to the edges of his expression. The federal investigation had cleared his name. The documents in his bag had exposed more than just Leonard's crimes. They had unraveled a network of corruption that stretched far beyond one airline and into financial channels that had gone unchecked for years. Dozens of people were now facing charges. Policies were being rewritten. The system had been forced to look at itself. David stopped in front of Evelyn. "I owe you my life," he said quietly. She shook her head. "You owe me nothing. You fought to tell the truth. You fought even when you were terrified. That wasn't me. That was you." He hesitated, then said, "I'm starting over. New city, new field. Something that doesn't involve ledgers or numbers or people with too much power. I don't know what yet, but I feel like I get a second chance." Evelyn's smile grew warmer. "You do. And you're ready for it." David nodded once deeply, and then stepped aside to let others come forward. As people drifted around her, Evelyn looked toward the exit doors where afternoon light filtered through the tall windows, painting gold streaks onto the carpet. It reminded her of the moment the plane had landed, when uncertainty hung heavy in the air, and she had wondered whether stepping off that aircraft meant stepping into chaos or stepping into purpose. She knew the answer now. Purpose always looks like chaos at the beginning. It requires the breaking of things that never should have stood in the first place. Later, when the hall emptied and only the faint echo of voices remained, Evelyn stood alone in the center aisle. The quiet wrapped around her shoulders like a soft garment. She had spent years believing she left her old career behind because it had cost her too much. But the truth was different. She left because she believed no one was listening. Today proved otherwise. Today proved that the right voice at the right moment could change the trajectory of countless lives. Her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. A simple line. "You spoke for all of us who stayed silent too long. Thank you." Evelyn closed her eyes, letting the words settle. She wasn't a hero. She wasn't a whistleblower reborn. She was a woman who refused to be quiet when silence would have been easier. A woman who believed that dignity belonged to everyone on that plane and everyone outside it. A woman who understood that justice isn't a storm that arrives uninvited. It's a choice, a daily one. As she gathered her bag and walked toward the door, she didn't feel like she was leaving something behind. She felt like she was walking toward something bigger, something she wasn't finished with yet. People wouldn't always want the truth. Systems wouldn't always welcome scrutiny. But she had found her voice again, and she wasn't about to let it fade. If you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, don't forget to subscribe, and comment 3 words stand for truth.